The House will come to order. The chair lays before the table before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., November 20th, 2024. I hereby appoint the Honorable Darrell Issa to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 9th, 2024, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for the morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties with time equally allocated between the parties, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the majority whip limited to 5 minutes. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. today. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize National Rural Health Day. Every third Thursday in November, we observe National Rural Health Day. Nearly 60 million Americans live in rural areas, and too often they encounter limited access to primary care, specialists, and mental health services. These gaps are worsened by transportation barriers and hospital closures. These challenges don't just affect individuals, they impact the entire families and communities. Before I was elected to serve in the House of Representatives, I spent nearly 30 years in the nonprofit healthcare field, assisting those with life-changing diseases and disabilities. It can be challenging to obtain reasonably priced health care, and this is especially true in rural America, like much of the 15th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. As a member of Congress representing nearly one-third of the landmass of Pennsylvania, one of the most rural districts east of the Mississippi, I am keenly aware of the problems my constituents face when accessing medical services. We're facing a healthcare crisis in our nation's rural areas. These often disadvantaged populations are still struggling to access affordable, quality care. While these challenges are great, there have been a few positive developments in recent years that stand to greatly benefit these communities. For one, I want to commend the work being done at the Pennsylvania Office of Rural Health. This office has stepped up on a number of occasions to assist distressed healthcare facilities throughout the Commonwealth and continues to work on policies that will bolster rural health care for years to come. Additionally, I cannot overstate the impact and importance of expanded telehealth services. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, telehealth added tremendous reach and value to communities across the country, especially in rural America. Many of my constituents were able to access regular care, without having to drive nearly an hour in some instances, ensuring they could get diagnosed and treated in an efficient manner. To ensure this success continues, I reintroduced the Health Act, which will allow community health centers and rural health clinics to continue providing telehealth services and receive fair reimbursement for doing so. I also continue to support efforts to bolster our healthcare workforce in rural areas. One of the driving forces behind many shuttered hospitals, healthcare facilities, and other services in these communities is a lack of staff, whether it be physicians, surgeons, OBGYNs, technicians, nurses, or any other folks critical to providing care. As providers struggle to attract and retain a talented workforce in our rural communities, we must think outside the box to resolve these issues. For example, I support efforts to encourage medical programs to place residents in rural communities as a part of their education, training, and rotations. We know that people are far more likely to remain in communities where they train and serve, and we must continue to build this pipeline and solidify our rural health workforce. These policies promote access to care for all Americans, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to ensure equitable care in our rural communities. Mr. Speaker, in rural communities, healthcare costs have gone up, premiums have skyrocketed, but choices have decreased. That's not right, and it's not fair, and it's not feasible. There must be a better way, and I know that together we will work to find a stable transition to a 21st century healthcare system that works for everyone in America, especially rural America. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Skolton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand today to recognize the life and career of one of my incredible constituents, Minnie Forbes, the last living owner of a Negro League baseball team, the Detroit Stars. Minnie Forbes was born in 1932 in Mississippi and eventually found her home in Grand Rapids with her uncle, Ted Raspberry, a player in the Negro Leagues. Her uncle taught her to play softball, and as a young teen, she played on the Grand Rapids Crooks Brown Dolls softball team. Minnie found her true love for the game, working behind the scenes in team management. By 18, Minnie was a secretary for her uncle and his multiple baseball teams, the Grand Rapids Black Sox, the Detroit Stars, and the Kansas City Monarchs. Then, at just 24, she became the owner of the Detroit Stars. Minnie was shocked but felt prepared to take over the team and thus became one of the few women ever to own a Negro League baseball team. As an owner of the Detroit Stars, Minnie endured racism and prejudice towards herself and her players, especially while traveling for games. Players were often forced to sleep and eat on the bus as their restaurants and hotels refused to accommodate and even feed Black Americans. Sometimes they were even chased out of town. The players and Minnie persevered through strife and their love of the game, and the ripple effects of that persistence echoed through the civil rights movement. Minnie and her contemporaries made strides in changing American culture through sport. We are forever indebted for their sacrifices in pursuing a more equal and equitable future for all. I'm proud to step up to the plate to commend Minnie for her extraordinary legacy, a legacy that continues to live on in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the Ted Raspberry Youth League, where I have had the honor of serving as a volunteer coach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, free market capitalism is the most democratic possible way to organize an economy. In a free market, consumers vote every day with every dollar they spend on what they want the economy to produce, who will produce it, and what they're willing to pay for it. The prices decided every day in this never-ending plebiscite also convey vast information regarding every product, including the scarcity or abundance of the resources in it, the labor conditions that produced it, and the systems that distributed it. It is a perfect system that requires only that government protect the freedom for a willing seller and a willing buyer to make an exchange according to their own best judgment. No force is required, because both act in their own self-interest. The price signals of that simple exchange, multiplied infinitely throughout the day, guide the labor and resources of an economy to their highest and best use according to every person's own individual interests and needs and judgment. Yet politicians love to interfere with this perfect mechanism through a variety of tools designed to direct the economy. That is, to replace the judgment of individual consumers and producers in the market with the judgment of politicians. One of the most insidious and self-destructive ways they do this is by subsidizing the things that they think consumers should buy in order to make those things more attractive. This literally stuffs the economy's ballot box, diverting resources from their highest and best economic use for consumers to the highest and best political use for politicians. Worse, it corrupts the accurate price signals that are essential for consumers to make rational decisions over allocating their own resources and thus directing overall economic output. Insurance, electric cars, mass transit, sugar, milk, solar panels, airline tickets, housing, tuition, healthcare, film production, green energy. It's hard to find a sector of the economy that isn't rife with subsidies. And let's not forget the infinite subsidies that saturate our tax code. True, these subsidies make the cost of favored products cheaper, and who can begrudge cheaper health care or tuition or housing? But that is an illusion. The reality is that sellers will always accept subsidies by raising their prices accordingly. Those receiving the subsidies are somewhat better off, but everyone else is much worse off. As subsidies artificially inflate prices, more subsidies are required to ameliorate their effect in a continuing spiral. It's no coincidence that the prices in the most heavily subsidized sectors like healthcare, housing, and tuition are rising much faster than the underlying inflation. Provide first-time homebuyers with a $25,000 subsidy, and sellers accept that windfall by raising their prices on the entire housing stock. Subsidies not only cost hundreds of billions of dollars and inflate the prices of the things being subsidized, but they also misallocate resources and misdirect consumer decisions. Insurance, for example, is how markets assign a dollar value to risk. It is risky to build a house in a flood zone, and high insurance premiums reflect that reality. Subsidized insurance rates invite people to take risks that high premiums would otherwise warn them against. Accurate price signals are absolutely essential if consumers are to make rational decisions as they vote every day on what the economy should produce, and they are just as essential if producers are to know what consumer demands that they most need to fulfill. Now, subsidies are so deeply ingrained in the economy that getting rid of all of them seems like a fool's errand. Every subsidy has a constituency, and the bigger the subsidy, the more powerful the constituency. But budget writers grappling with the largest federal debt in history and with an economy operating well below its potential should be looking for every way to reduce, eliminate, or reform subsidies or substitute for them other mechanisms that can serve the same societal aims without doing so much damage. So here's a modest proposal to Messrs. Musk and Ramaswamy. If you want to balance the budget and improve the economy, just say no to subsidies. Not only will such a hunt save hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars, it will reduce the overall cost of the things being subsidized and will reinvigorate the economy by restoring the flow of capital to its most productive use. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize the recent surge in anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, and Islamophobic hate crimes in our country. The constant dehumanization of Palestinians has very real and deadly consequences. The hateful rhetoric, including from many elected officials in this chamber and in the media, is leading to violence in our communities and putting our countless lives at risk. Hisham, Kenan, Tassin are childhood friends, all college students. They were spending Thanksgiving break in Hisham's family in Burlington, Vermont, where they were shot by a man sitting on his porch. They were targeted while wearing keffiyehs and speaking Arabic. Hisham is now paralyzed from the chest down. These hate crimes are not isolated incidents, Mr. Speaker. In October of last year, a man from Farmington Hills, Michigan, posted on social media that he wanted to come to my district in Metro Detroit area and wanted to, quote, "Who wants to join me to go hunt Palestinians?" These threats to commit mass murder horrified our community in Dearborn, many not wanting to open their doors, already grieving the loss of so many loved ones and friends of the horrific genocide taking place. I want to also talk about last month in Detroit, 7-year-old Sada. I wish people would take the time to actually listen to her interview. As a Yemeni American child of Muslim faith was playing at her park, local park, was brutally attacked while playing. A man approached her out of nowhere and slit her throat with a knife. Sada ran home to her parents covered in blood. As a mother, I cannot fathom the horror of her parents must have felt at that moment, watching their little girl coming running in, bleeding and terrified. Sada survived, but she would live with the trauma for the rest of her life. Nightmares keep Sada awake at night. She says she dreams her attacker is right next to her. In Texas, a mother wearing a hijab was watching her children swim in the community pool when she was approached by a woman interrogating her about what language she was speaking. The woman then jumped into the pool, attempted to drown her 3-year-old Palestinian daughter who was grasping for breath for air as she was pushed under the water in the deep end of the pool. The woman threatened to kill the whole family as the police were carrying her away. Her mother said, "We are American citizens, originally from Palestine, and I don't know where to go to feel safe with my kids. My daughter is traumatized. Whenever I open the door, she runs away and hides, telling me she's afraid that lady will come back and try to attack her again." And here we go with Wadia. Everyone knows about Wadia, I hope. In Chicago, a 6-year-old child was brutally attacked in his own home by his landlord, of all people. His mother ran to the bathroom to call the police. His attacker was yelling, "You Muslims must die," while he stabbed little Wadia's body 26 times. They had to pull the knife out of his small body. When his mother came back, when she saw his lifeless body there, taken to the hospital, all she heard was just this sense of she will never ever be able to see her child. "We are not animals. We are humans," Wadia's uncle Yusuf said. These stories are horrifying as they are. I'm just thinking of the fact that these are the ones who made the headlines. Behind them are countless others, unreported incidents, with families living in fear and communities being targeted. I was approached by a father who said his child was on her school bus and somebody tried to rip her hijab off. I said, "Did you report it? Who do I report that to?" What terrifies me most, again, is these acts of violence are born from culture of dehumanization. Where is the outrage from my colleagues in this chamber? Why don't my colleagues denounce Islamophobia, anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab hate? We must push back against dangerous rhetoric that fuels this violence and call out those that continue to push for dehumanizing narratives that they just contribute to and spread this kind of violence. Stop using racist tropes that feed into this hate. I know firsthand what it feels like to be targeted with hate. I receive death threats, smears, hate mail, and relentless harassment right outside of my office. To the families of Wadia, Hisham, Kinan, Tassim, Sada, and so many others who we will never know about, I want you to know I see you, I grieve with you, and I stand with you. I yield.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lopez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address our national debt. My fellow Americans, we have a serious problem. In the past 40 years, Congress, which comprises of both the Senate and the House of Representatives, has only passed a budget 4 times. Only 4 times in the last 40 years has a budget been passed by Congress. That has contributed to our overwhelming national debt of over $36 trillion, which grows by $1 trillion every 100 days. If we continue to pass continued resolutions and omnibus bills, our annual deficits will double. Our interest payments will triple, and for every dollar we borrow, 50 cents will go just to pay an interest on the debt. The American people are tired of Congress not doing the hard work that is necessary to bring spending under control and stop the national debt from growing. As members of Congress, we have an obligation to bring spending under control and ensure that present and future taxpayers are not forced to fund any federal program that is duplicative, wasteful, and inefficient. Every member of Congress knows that passing continued resolutions or omnibus bills does not bring spending under control, but simply adds to our $36 trillion national debt. The current continuing resolution expires on December 20th. So once again, in the next couple of weeks, Congress will debate on how we're going to fund the government in 2025. So what will it be? Will it be a continuing resolution? Will it be an omnibus bill? Or will it be a balanced budget that will fund the government in 2025? Speaker Johnson assures us that it will not be an omnibus bill, and because Chuck Schumer refuses to pass the appropriation bills passed in the House, some will argue that the only option left on the table so that we don't face a government shutdown is a continued resolution. Most Americans are not aware that there is a boogeyman that lurks in the halls of Congress. This boogeyman shows up twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year. It first shows up in September, and then it appears again in December. What is the name of this boogeyman that Congress is afraid to face? Its name is government shutdown. For countless years, the leaders of Congress have lacked the courage and strength to take on this boogeyman for fear of having to explain to the American people why we're unable to pass or perhaps refuse to pass a formal budget as outlined in the 1974 Budget Act. The American people are not afraid to shut down the government, and I stand with the American people. It is morally wrong for Congress to force the American people to carry a $36 trillion national debt on their backs and to expect our children to carry this growing debt on their backs as well. I say it's time for Congress to pass a formal budget that spends less than what it collects in taxes from the American people. I say it's time for Congress to evaluate one by one the 1,200 unauthorized expired programs that are currently being funded by Congress to the tune of $516 billion and vote to either reauthorize or terminate each one of them. I hear in the halls of Congress that if we want to be home with our families during Christmas, we must settle for a continued resolution. I would remind Congress that we have men and women in uniform that have taken the same oath of office that we did, and many of them will not be spending Christmas with their families because they have a duty to fulfill. We also have a duty and obligation to fulfill to the American people. That is to bring spending under control and stop the national debt from growing. And that responsibility comes before family or any holiday on the calendar. Congress should not allow the leadership of either the Senate or the House of Representatives to lead us into 2025 with a shameful continued legacy that Congress is incapable of putting people over politics and passing a balanced formal budget that spends less than we receive from the taxpayers. So to Chuck Schumer, I say put your ego and pride aside and sit down with Speaker Johnson and develop a plan to utilize the appropriation process outlined in the 1974 Budget Act to fund the